was a level playing field in effect. There were rules to keep peace, and there were rules for peaceful dispute resolution, and there were rules that were committed us to cooperating across countries. All of that is in question. All of that is questioned for many reasons. One is, decades ago, we thought that the rise of giants like China and potentially India were going to be the great disruptors of world order. Today, we realize that actually it's America that's the great disruptor of world order. As Adam Posen says, America has turned from the global insurer to a profits extractor. It's not only disrupting this system that Asia has prospered under, it is seeking to extract from the rest of the world rent because America is angry at the world. Now, this is something that we have never seen to this degree. So you're right to question it. The follow-on question that I think is pregnant in your intervention is, so what do we do?
Right.
What do we do if we no longer have this idea of a benevolent hegemon that protects the world and protects itself at the same time? It has a different view. So I like to think about where we can keep the world multilateral enough. Right? The world used to be multilateral. Mm-hmm. There was the big vision that America carved out for us 70 years ago. It no longer shares that vision. How do the rest of us make the world multilateral enough? And here we look to the leadership of middle powers and small states. I'm not the only one who says this. Many others are saying this because we have come to the view that America is no longer a trusted partner.
So that's a very powerful point you make about middle powers, but there too it raises some questions. Now, I was in the audience at Davos when Mark Carney made his speech in January that caught a lot of attention, suggesting that there is a role for middle powers to create an alliance of the willing or coalitions of the willing, to build a new world order that rests on the good things of the previous world order, even if, let's say, some big countries go their own way. How serious is this prospect, given that typically middle powers themselves have been either free riders or have fallen into the Soviet camp or the US camp or maybe increasingly the Chinese camp, and China itself, the giant, of course, with its own superpower ambitions, preferring to take on the mantle of the old world order through regulations, through standards, through exports of clean energy technologies and critical minerals. In other words, we don't have uniformity in this view. Exactly. So help us understand how this is going to happen.
So the operational phrase in what you said is the coalition of the willing. What are the groups out there that will come together and make our engagements multilateral enough in a specific domain? It doesn't have to be multilateral globally, universally, where we all agree on the system. It just has to be multilateral enough. Amitav Acharya, a wonderful Indian-American international relations scholar, has a vision of the world becoming like a multiplex cinema theater, where different parts of the world come together and they draw on different directors, different movies, different popcorns. They draw on different attributes that the international system can build. I think that's a good first step. We need to think about coalitions of the willing that focus in on, to use a technical term, plurilateral understandings that are just multilateral enough. India, being a middle power clearly already, if not already veering into great powerdom, can play a great role in that. But I want to be very careful in this. The new world order will not be built on power alone. The operative word in coalition of the willing is that people are incentivized to be part of this. We have to see how India and other middle powers that Mark Carney envisions can build those coalitions of willing, because that's not going to be spontaneous. That's not going to come from anywhere. I have some ideas about how we can build that, but the first key theme to latch onto is that it has to be incentives and coalitions of the willing that will come together in this way. That doesn't happen spontaneously, but India and other states with good ideas can help build that.
So it's a good point about incentives, of course. All successful multilateral deals succeed because it serves the self-interest of the countries that are participating, not because of goodwill or benevolence or charity. So we'll have to see how these shifting alliances work, and they may be shifting over time or by issue. There may be different coalitions. Now, you didn't use the concept of the multiplex cinema. Sometimes looking at the late night tweets and overnight developments, I don't know if I'm attending the comedy or the tragedy movie at the Cineplex. So we'll have to see how that works out. But I do want to press you once more on the question of China, because you didn't comment specifically on that. You know, you've been expansive in your comments on the United States as the disruptor, and rightly so. But can you give us an example or your analysis of how China, which has had its own challenges in this region, including here in India, there's a lot of wariness of China, Chinese technology, and so on in this country. What is the role of China? Is it the stabilizer for the world, the new regional hegemon, or do you see it playing a different kind of role? And how would a country like India, with its own great aspirations, handle the ambitions and legacy power of China?
Okay, so for us in Southeast Asia, we're all small states. What we feel is not necessarily a malevolence in any great power in our region, but sharp elbows. Sharp elbows as they maneuver and try and do the best they can. So those sharp elbows for China, I think, show up most visibly in something called the China shock, which America talks about. America has been talking about that for 2 decades now, and the rest of us are beginning to feel. China's manufacturing and export prowess are so overwhelming that the sharp elbows then show up in how the rest of us view this shock. And just as America once did, the rest of us are thinking, what role do we have in an economic world where China is so overwhelmingly competent? Is it indeed stealing our jobs, hollowing our industry, turning into ghost towns our middle-class communities? That China shock idea is now pervasive. That's an example of a sharp elbow. All great powers will have that happen. Now, that's quite different from saying, oh, I am angry at the world and I'm going to inflict tariffs on all of you. I'm going to impose sanctions on you. I'm going to seize your territory to make my country better off. These are quite different approaches.
Well, are they though? Just again, once again, to sort of really unpack your ideas for our audience. The China shock, I think we all understand that. We've seen it, the evidence of it. Of course, I was our bureau chief in Shanghai. I opened the Shanghai Bureau for The Economist, lived almost a decade there. So I saw this at firsthand. And there's a dynamism to the private sector, the Alibabas, the Tencents, the Xiaomis, and so on. So the Chinese have a dynamic ecosystem. However, there is no question there is a state capitalism that enables that to flourish, and that is very clearly part of their plan. So in that system, you have the effects rippling through the world of the China shock, but the tariffs that have come have clearly, at least in the Western world, been in response to that. Yeah. I would argue, and we have argued, and most economists would argue, that's in part a misattribution, because most of the jobs that were lost in the Rust Belt in America, for example, were because of technological change, not because of China or Mexico with the NAFTA deal, as is misattributed in politics. So as a writer for The Economist, I feel obliged that I have to point that out. We have to be clear. But in politics, sometimes the facts don't matter as much as what perception. And China and the China shock has been a huge fuel behind tariffs. Now, moving beyond that, do you think this is the right response or a helpful response? Or would you say, going beyond mere protectionism, are there other policies you would advocate for the legitimate concerns arising from the China shock?
Yeah. So, Adam Smith, a thinker whose ideas drive a lot of economists' thinking, said that it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, brewer, or baker they will expect our dinner on table, but from their regard to their self-interest. We need to figure out how to harness other people's self-interest so that they provide us the good things that we want. So in your description of China, China is providing, as India is providing, renewable energy. We're building massive capacity, the two great powers, the two great powers in Asia. That's a good thing. The global development growth is an energy-intensive process. It requires energy. It doesn't require hydrocarbons. It requires energy, and energy can take the form of renewables. So anything, even state capitalism, that drives the development of renewables, I think is a good thing for the world. The world used to develop in a way that if we continue today, as you said about Gandhi, consuming entire planets, we're burning our planet to a crisp right now. How do we still get energy and not have that happen? If state capitalism is what delivers it, I'm not against state capitalism. And just to be clear, America raised tariffs not just against China for the China shop, it raised tariffs on 200 economies in the world,
yes,
including my friends in the Heard and McDonald Islands, where there are only 2,000 penguins live. It raised tariffs against India, first from 25% and then to 50% on the observation that India was importing crude oil from Russia. It raised tariffs against Singapore and South Korea. We already have free trade agreements with them.
Well, you know, those penguins subsidize their exports.
No,
so it's very unfair,
okay.
those
But
penguins,
let's put to one side. Yeah. Let's put to one side how we produce our exports.
Yeah.
Because as far as the other guys are concerned,
Sure.
we're on the import side. All that matters to me is what keeps my consumers supplied with high quality, low price goods. That's the only thing I should worry about.
Well, listen, I think this is a very interesting argument, but it slightly seems to go against your prior argument. I'm very sympathetic to this idea that China's green energy exports, indeed, we have run multiple cover stories arguing this, should be welcomed by the world. I mean, if you visit London, you'll see BYD and other Chinese cars, or you can't swing a cat without hitting a Chinese EV, and that's to be welcomed. It's dramatically reducing the footprint of petrol usage and diesel usage in the UK and other countries that welcome Chinese goods. Solar panels around the world have been a blessing for many parts of the world, and leapfrogging ahead on electrification, one of the powerful megatrends we're going to talk about later in the day as well. And we have some leaders in electrification coming on stage shortly. We'll talk with Adani Group in a moment. So that's all to the good. And if the Chinese taxpayer is subsidizing the world to tackle climate change in a cheap and effective manner, hurrah, right? Countries should welcome it. The problem, though, is the one you've already raised, Professor, and that is, what about jobs? What about jobs at home? What about manufacturing industry at home? It has been raised as a concern from Danny Roderick at Harvard and others that if there's a demographic dividend of 1 billion plus people in sub-Saharan Africa waiting for their first chance to industrialize, to have access to modern energy, and they're given a world in which they have no chance to develop manufacturing because there's too many cheap subsidized imports taking the chance away from them. And of course, India is more advanced than those economies, but similar challenges are here as well. So how do you reconcile the tension between those two very good arguments that you yourself have made?
So I would say the way in which we treat the jobs problem is not by curtailing supply from the other guy, but by making our workers and our industries more productive. India is doing that. India has increased its renewables capacity hugely. It is making its workers more productive in the green space. You know, the solution to this challenge is not by short-circuiting the supply chain that's emerging from the other side, but by making our side better. Daniel Roderick would certainly agree with that. That's part of what industrial policy does. So I think that we do have a way.
So investments in education, infrastructure, productivity,
relocating
perhaps
our
in
people
AI.
across industries,
Right.
Helping them transition, protecting the weakest, most exposed, most vulnerable of our people, so that politically, as they become pivotal, they don't raise a populist cry that ends up just hurting us against the other guy.
Okay.
So there are lots of ways we should be doing this more constructively. I mean, and I feel that, you know, in Asia, our economies, our policymakers see the way clear through to that. We're not trying to leverage power to cobble the other guy.
Sure.
We're trying to make ourselves better.
That's a positive agenda. I appreciate that. I'm going to come to the audience for a couple of questions. Let's get our microphone runners. Let me see. We have microphones, so please wait for the microphones to come to you. And those of you who's going to be the courageous one to ask a first good question? Okay, we have a gentleman whose hand is up here in the front. Let's get a microphone. The ground rules, sir, for you as everyone else, please identify yourself and your affiliation and make it a good question, not a long-winded speech.
Good morning, Professor. My name is Paramjit Singh. I'm a working professional working in a tech company.
A bit closer to your mouth?
Yeah. So my name is Paramjit Singh. I'm a working professional working in a tech company. And I'm also a PhD scholar doing research on the geopolitical events impacting the growth and political strategies, corporate strategies of the companies. My question is that West is still retaining the IP-heavy growth, the IP-heavy innovation, the technical innovation. And most of the dirty work, manufacturing, which is leading to the environmental pollution, carbon-intensive work is being done by Asia. Is there a structural way to leapfrog for countries like India to move from the path which these nations have followed in the past for becoming developed getting to productivity improvements, doing manufacturing, paying cost to the tax to the environment, which is in terms of pollution, and leapfrog directly into a path where we can lead to growth.
Okay, thank you. Good, clear question.
Okay, I don't have an answer to the leapfrogging opportunity yet, but I do want to say I agree with you on the severity of the problem. In many countries, they have tried to obviate the manufacturing route. We've ended up not generating enough jobs. So for instance, one of the huge problems challenging Asia is the aging population.
Yes.
Aging population in Northeast Asia, in Singapore, but not in South Asia. India has a nice working age population. However, it is also the case that the increase in working age population in India over the last generation is double the increase in employment. So even if we have young working age populations, we've not been able to create jobs for them. This is a huge problem. It's politically very explosive. We don't have a solution for that. I mean, we know that in China and elsewhere, they're trying to think about how service-oriented digital economy, green energy, green economy sectors can be producing jobs for their people. We should all be thinking about the same thing. We don't have a clear magic bullet, silver bullet solution to that yet.
Now, I mean, there's a dimension to that question that in the West has been called carbon dumping, right? Particularly accused of China, but we now see this come to the fore with the CBAM treaty that Europe has implemented. Do you think the CBAM is a good idea, or is it an unjust colonial tax imposed on developing countries?
I think CBAM, to the extent that it makes things more efficient, is a good idea. But there's no reason why we can't have a just transition, what the activists call a just transition, where there can be transfers from the rich countries to the poor countries to help them advance up. Because if the global south doesn't make it, the world's not going to make it.
But that transfer, are you talking about aid money? Because that model is broken.
No, well, okay. This comes back to our discussion about world order. It happens to be that America used to be the source for a lot of aid money. It's not the only source, of course, but it used to be a large source. And it no longer sees reason fit to do that. We need to come up with a replacement. But that's not going to, I mean, the fact that America has pulled back from it does not mean that it's not a good idea.
Sure. Let's go to the back. I see a gentleman there. Again, please make it a short question. Our time is running short.
My name is Himanshu Jain. I'm a consultant now after spending years in corporate. My question is, Professor just said that, instead of trying and being protective, you should try and create internal capacity, improve productivity, and make things happen. Very right. The only challenge is,
Well, get to the question.
Given the situation these economies are in, how feasible is it to do that? It's like telling David that you become as tall as the Goliath before you take on them. And is it possible or is it difficult? How do you see it?
Thank you.
It's not at all impossible. In fact, one of the dangers is when many of us countries around the world invoke the words resilience, that we can bounce back from these shocks, or national security, what we actually end up meaning is protectionism. And as you point out, we don't want to do that. Now, there's a clear way forward. You don't have to be a great power to build resilience for your own people. It has to come from simple schooling, like you described.
The smallest island state can build resilience.
Yeah, exactly. That's in fact what we should all be doing, and that's the way forward.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I have another question here in the back. Let's keep it moving along. I see the gentleman there. Just wait for the microphone, please. There it is.
Yeah, my name is Raghu. I'm from Hyderabad. My question is, the lobbies of the oil or the pharma or the other big giants dictate the world order. I mean, were dictating. Is it still the case, or it's ended now?
Okay, so the power of the incumbents.
Yeah, so we cannot underestimate the power of incumbents. However, the greatest incumbent has decided to exit stage left, no longer is interested in running the world in a way that benefits it and benefits others. So what's happened is that we've left the landscape open to a version of hyper-multipolarity that the rest of us can use to build a world with flexible topologies that do better for us. Now, the other thing you mentioned is energy, oil and gas. It's true that the last 200 years since the Industrial Revolution has seen great conflicts emerge over territorial disagreements that contain hydrocarbons. Part of the benefit of moving to a cleaner, greener world is that we can remove that as a reason for global conflict. The world still runs on energy. It doesn't have to run on hydrocarbons.
Just to double down on what you've said, I think that legacy can give powerful advantages, but if we have disruptive innovations, and I had the great honor of studying at the feet of Clay Christensen, the Harvard Business School professor, who conceived of this idea and popularized it, legacy can very quickly become a liability as well. And we've seen this multiple times, and we've seen this from the emerging world. I mean, let's remember, in East Africa, among the poorest places in the world, M-Pesa was invented, that is mobile banking. And for many years, East Africa had mobile banking when I, living in New York, was writing paper checks, and I couldn't send money by wire, right, or using apps. And so, like that, we'll see frugal engineering, Jugaad engineering, and innovations coming from India, China with WeChat and Alipay. There are multiple innovations that have taken on incumbent models, and I predict that the fossil model, while durable in many ways and will be part of the global energy mix, will increasingly be challenged as we move towards the age of electricity in which we're entering, and which will be the subject of our next session. But we'll get into that in a moment. Yes, there's a question here. Please make it short and sweet.
Yes, my name is Alok Brara from India Infrastructure. What happens if there's a change of party leadership in Congress in US later this year, or a different administration comes, a Democrat party, within 2028?
Yeah.
Especially with respect to their stance on decarbonization and sustainability.
Okay. I think the Trump administration is extreme in the way it's managing these global challenges. But I think America has been on a trajectory that makes Trump both cause and symptom. Where the Trump administration sits is not a million miles away from where a Democrat administration, who's wary of how the rest of the world has emerged, will undertake its actions. One of the clearest examples of that is when, under Trump 1.0, he enacted these tariff actions against China, and under Biden, no tariff actions were rolled back. America has settled into a trajectory where it feels more and more the appeal of autarky and isolation. It's not going to go back. As Graham Allison, another Harvard personality, said, America might not be happy until it returns to a time when it was surrounded only by friends to the north and south and fish to the east and west. It doesn't really care about going beyond that.
Perspective I'd offer is, don't believe everything you read. When we look at the broader trends, and your question really had to do with what might be the future for the US, regardless of political outcome, on decarbonization, on action on climate and clean energy. And let's bear in mind that Trump 1.0, where President Trump had similar views on clean energy, bashing it and so on, and drill, baby, drill. That's when he invented and popularized that concept. Saw more wind and solar during that period of time than any time prior in American history. Now, the actions are more aggressive now, but actually, what all of the modeling shows from the leading shops is that the US is not going to recarbonize, meaning what we're seeing is a slower rate of decarbonization, slightly under the Trump trajectory, and 90% of the electricity installed in 2025 in America was zero carbon or low carbon, even under Trump 2.0 policies. And the #1 state for wind, for solar, for batteries, grid-scale batteries, which are a fundamental enabler of the clean energy revolution. Who wants to guess the #1 state? Was it? It's Texas, exactly. A gold star to the gentleman who's shouted that out. That is deeply Republican, red, anti-ESG, pro-Trump Texas. The top regulator in Texas, I asked him, who runs ERCOT, how do you explain the power grid there? It's a very free market power grid where they have time of use pricing, incentives, market-based, and even the legislature is subsidizing natural gas plants. If you'll build a natural gas plant, there's a subsidy they'll give you. The market's not taking it. They're building batteries, solar. It's the fastest way to go to power, and it's the quickest way to meet all the data center load and so on. And he said, well, we do think solar and batteries are communist, but our farmers can make a lot more money with solar and batteries, and in Texas, capitalism beats communism. That's how he explained it. So you need to be able to hold some complicated thoughts in your head.
Wonderful.
So here's 2 cheers for capitalism if that's what it does.
Well, I just want to quickly add, there are 2 grand themes embedded in the question. One has to do with relations across countries and the international trading system.
Yeah.
The other has to do with climate. Economics, profits drives both. And profits is driving very clearly a greenification, even if the rhetoric is otherwise. But on the trade side, it is driving America in a direction different
That's right.
from this.
That's great. Well, I think that's an excellent note to end on. It's a good segue to our next session. Please give the professor a round of applause for getting us off to a great start. Thank you so much, sir. We appreciate you. Let's get a picture. Terrific. Thank you, sir. And as I've alluded to already, one of the great themes of our age, and indeed of our next session, is electrification. And why does this matter so much? Let's remember, through most of the last century, the predominant final energy carrier has been fossil fuels, has been liquid fuels. Even now, maybe 80% of the global total. But by every official and formal prediction from the International Energy Agency and other leading thinkers, electrification, electricity as a fuel, is on the rise. It is a global electrification super cycle, it's been called. And this is a very good thing. It should be applauded. Electricity is clean at the point of use, and depending on how you make it, increasingly through clean energy, we have the opportunity to decarbonize energy systems, whereas if you stick with fossil fuels, and I say this as a mechanical engineer from MIT, we studied internal combustion engines, they're not going to get much better, folks. You're going to burn much of the energy that you burn in diesel or petrol, and you won't be able to capture that back. Whereas with electricity, you have the opportunity to get extremely high efficiencies and therefore consume less resources to begin with in the entire energy system, and it provides a lever for change. According to the International Energy Agency, the global rate of electrification in the next 5 years will grow at double the rate of global energy demand. That is, energy demand is growing. The world is using more energy, but the rate of electrification as a share of that is growing at least twice as fast, and in some countries, much faster than that. As India aspires to its great ambitions in energy, development, growth, and sustainability, I predict that India will become one of the great electrostates. We've already seen the beginnings of this. On the numbers that we've seen, India has now actually achieved a higher rate of electrification for a comparable level of GDP per head. That is, for as wealthy as when China was at this comparable level, it had a much lower level of electrification. And the tools needed for electrification with clean energy were not available then to China. They're readily available now. Now the question is, how do you implement it? How do you make it happen? What are the right policies? We're going to talk with a minister about this later. What are the right financial tools? We have financial experts coming and development bank experts. And what is the role of business and entrepreneurs in making this happen? And that's going to be the subject of my next session. So I'm delighted to invite to the stage, please welcome Sagar Adani to the microphone. Welcome. Please give him a nice round of applause. Thank you to Adani for sponsoring this session. Come on up, Sagar. Such a pleasure to have you here. Please join us. And actually, why don't you, I challenge you, give us a provocation. I'll give you a few minutes. Get us going, and then I'll come and talk to you about this.
Lovely.
Okay, please.
Thank you.
All right.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's truly a pleasure to speak in front of such a distinguished audience. I don't think that this summit and its central theme could come at a more important time. With everything that we've learned in the last few weeks, it is clear that in this century, access to energy is the only thing that's going to define resilience. Today, resilience is no longer a concept that is confined to classrooms or simulated in war rooms. It is a reality of what the world faces today. We've all seen how a conflict in one region can disrupt supply chains across continents. We've all seen how shocks in energy markets can ripple through economies overnight. And in that world, the question for every economy today is not how fast you can grow, but how well can you withstand disruptions. And nowhere is that question more relevant or more consequential than in India. India today is a nation that is defined by aspiration. You see it everywhere. In young people stepping into a new economy, in farmers adapting to new realities, in entrepreneurs building with confidence. There is a deep collective belief that the future will be better than both the past and the present. But aspiration, my friends, by itself, unfortunately, does not build nations. It needs a foundation. And India's answer to all of its foundational challenges is energy and only energy. Water security needs energy. for desalination, water treatment, water distribution. Food security needs energy for fertilizers, irrigation, logistics. Digital leadership needs energy for data centers, AI, compute infrastructure. So if resilience is the goal, then abundant, reliable, and affordable energy is the foundation. Let's put the scale of India's challenge into perspective. On a per capita basis, India's consumption is about 1/3 of the world average and 1/5 of China's. So if India is to become a developed country by 2047, we are not talking about incremental growth. We are talking about a structural leap. We're talking about adding nearly 2,000 gigawatts of new capacity to the India's energy grid over the next 2 decades. All this while ensuring that this energy remains affordable, accessible, and increasingly clean. That, my friends, is a scale of the opportunity, and that's India's most defining challenge. When you look globally, countries that have built resilience at scale have always done one thing exceptionally well. They've always secured their energy foundations. Most developed and prosperous countries are either energy independent or have built deep strategic energy partnerships. We don't have to look very far, as Vijayji was alluding to earlier, to find a more relevant example. China, despite being constrained in both oil and gas just like India, has systematically invested in significant energy resources domestically. They've built strategic reserves, and they've strengthened and hardened supply chains. Yes, of course, it remains dependent on global energy flows, but the level of resilience it has built over the last 2 decades is very remarkable. And the outcome is not just energy security. It is industrial strength, economic stability, and global competitiveness. For India, the path forward is clear. We must electrify everything. We must reduce structural dependence on imported energy. We must build an energy backbone that is anchored in resources that are available within our country. That is India's only credible path to long-term stability. But of course, electrification at scale demands one thing above everything else, and that is a massive growth in electricity supply. And this is where we must be pragmatic. Renewables will and must scale rapidly. Storage technologies will continue to evolve, but there are real constraints, particularly both around land and intermittency. Which means that to truly close this gap, India must adopt a portfolio approach. We must leverage fully every single energy source available to us. Renewables, yes. Hydro, yes. But also efficient thermal and nuclear. Because without firm, scalable baseload power, the math simply does not work. This is not optional for India, it is inevitable. It would be very incomplete to not recognize the role that the government and the country's leadership has played in enabling this journey. Over the last decade or more, India's leadership has played an exceptional role in cutting red tape, getting rid of unnecessary and outdated regulations, revitalizing public undertakings, and encouraging private enterprises. Countless macro and micro policy initiatives by the government have resulted in an environment where businesses can grow, flourish, and prosper. India has seen a clear, consistent, and increasingly execution-oriented policy stance. From accelerating infrastructure deployment, expanding renewable capacity, strengthening transmission networks, and enabling long-term investments, there has been both clarity of intent and continuity of action. And that continuity is the most critical enabler for resilience. Coming to the role of industry and specifically the Adani Group, at our core, we see ourselves not only as infrastructure operators, but as fundamental builders of India's energy backbone over the next several decades. Our chairman, Mr. Gautam Adani, has committed over $100 billion towards energy transition, one of the largest private sector commitments globally. But more importantly, it is not a mix of isolated investments. It is an integrated strategy. We are building one of the world's largest renewable energy portfolios, investing in large-scale energy storage, expanding transmission networks, and looking to develop green hydrogen ecosystems. Beyond energy, our presence across ports, logistics, airports, and data centers is a part of the same vision. And that vision is that resilience can never be built in silos. It can only be built through integrated ecosystems. Energy powers industry, logistics enables trade, and digital infrastructure drives productivity. And when these systems work together, you don't just create growth, you create durable resilience. So if I were to leave you all with one thought, it would be this. The real question is not whether India will need more energy. That already is very clear. The real question is how fast can we build it? Because in the end, resilience can never be built through intent alone. It is only built through execution, through the ability to create infrastructure at scale, at speed, and with purpose. And if India gets this right, we can deliver, if we can deliver abundant, affordable, and clean energy at the scale that is required, we will not just secure our own future. We will not just elevate 1.4 billion people. We will help stabilize the future of the global economy. Because India does not operate in isolation. What happens in India matters everywhere in every single corner of the world. That, my friends, is both our opportunity and our collective responsibility. Thank you so much.
Come, have a seat. Let's dig into this. I certainly agree with your proposition that energy is the master resource. It is the enabler of all of the other things that society aspires to. And you make the point as well in the end that India is going to be an example for the world. The world is watching as the largest, fastest growing major economy, one that's capable of tremendous momentum when India gets going. But it seems to me there are three areas of potential challenges, and I want to get your perspective on this. Policy, technology, and finance, where you're our industrialist on stage. You're talking about execution, right? This is where the rubber hits the road. You're not the professor talking about grand strategy. So when you talk about execution, what is it that you see in policy, one that has been the most enabling of being able to scale as quickly as you've started to do, and as India is certainly moving rapidly in renewables? But what is the remaining biggest challenge on policy that you would like to see improved?
So on the policy front, Vijayji, two things. What India has done exceptionally well over the last couple of years has been, as I said, a very significant debottlenecking of approvals. Permits, approvals, clearances, India's transformed completely at a fundamental level. If you look at renewables, India last year added 55 gigawatts of new renewable energy installations on the ground. That is the historic highest for the country ever. And that's been done because the government's been so proactive with regards to enabling the infrastructure to come up on the ground. What it has already started doing a lot of is how do you look at integration between the overall national electricity plan? How much thermal is coming in? How much renewables is coming in? When? Are the evacuation bottlenecks ready to be able to capture and evacuate that power? Is that being bottlenecked? Is the timing of the capacity addition in sync with the timing of the transmission capacity being added? There's a timing mismatch. So government has already started to streamline a lot of these things, but there is a little more streamlining that is required, which the government is already working on. So the constraint that you speak of, I believe, is just that. How do you look at systemic integration of everything coming together within the timelines that they're coming together in, so that no capacity gets stranded at the country level?
So you put your finger on what the energy experts in India really see as one of the important challenges. That is the grid in India, which has some tremendous qualities, meaning you have a national grid. It's heavily invested. It's a modern grid and one that's improving. however, is not able to keep pace with the pace of additions of clean energy. So you're seeing a lot of curtailment. And so grid investment, presumably, is one area of investment. And we do see private sector investment around the world coming into transmission lines. That's one possibility. A second possibility, and I want you to refer maybe to the battery investments you're making, that gets to the technology point that I want to talk about, because one of the things that I'm a huge advocate of is energy storage on the grid. I wrote a story a couple of years ago talking about a battery revolution that's coming. And even internally at The Economist, there's a lot of skepticism. Those of you who are not in energy, you'll know, if you want to put people to sleep at a dinner party, start talking about energy. If you don't want to be invited back, start talking about energy storage for the grid. You'll never be invited back, right? But this was the #1 story on The Economist website globally for a week, even with competition of Trump in the Middle East and so on, because when one really looks at the battery revolution that's ongoing, the collapse in prices, the improvement in durability and longevity, the potential to transform clean energy from one time of day to another, if the rules are right and incentivize time shifting. So talk a little bit about that, because I know you have big plans for BESS, as it's called, battery energy storage for the grid.
Yes.
I was able to see some of this at firsthand, where you're scaling this up, but it depends crucially on the ability to monetize this, and only some places in India, as of now, have time of use pricing, for example, or other measures. So what can be done to accelerate this trend?
No, I think, first of all, your thesis is absolutely right. I think energy storage is an inevitability in India going forward, and at scales which no one would have possibly thought of or imagined. Us as a group, just us alone, we shortly, in the next couple of days, will have about 3 gigawatt hours of installed BESS capacity. That makes it one of the largest installed capacities anywhere in the world already in a single location. But that's not even the point, because our internal plan is to add between 10 to 15,000 megawatt hours, 10 to 15 gigawatt hours every year going forward.
Now, this is not free, right? Solar prices collapse. What is the business case for doing this for you?
The business case for this basically is when you have so much solar capacity being added across the country. There is a time of a day where all those capacities are generating power together.
Well, when it's hot, when it's sunny
hot,
during
and
the
when
day.
it's sunny during the afternoon.
Sure.
That's not necessarily always when the grid requires power.
Right.
Which leads to a drop in terms of grid prices.
Right.
So instead of supplying that electricity directly into the grid at that point in time, you can just use that energy to store in the batteries.
So you arbitrage, you do the time
Arbitrage,
difference. But
exactly.
that only works if you get paid for it later.
Which India grid allows you to charge for. Right. So what we are doing today as a group, as our economic program is, we discharge 100% of that electricity into the grid between 6 and 10 p.m., which is evening peak hours. So the rates in the grid go somewhere between 8 to 10 rupees per unit at that time, versus let's say 2.5 during the day.
Right.
So obviously batteries are expensive, so the economics have to work. But the evening peak that the country has available today gives us enough.
So no further reforms are needed. You're 100% satisfied.
Completely, 100%.
Okay, well, you heard it here first. I'll tell the minister when he turns up as well. No need to do anything more. These guys keep building everything that they've promised, unlike some
that's
others.
That's why we're building on the ground what we're building,
Right.
because we're comfortable with what the framework is.
Let's talk about finance. This is obviously enormous amounts of capital that's going to be required to build out the green energy revolution, in tandem with continuing to keep the lights on with firm power that you talked about, the continued need to have, whether it's nuclear or thermal or whether it's the battery energy storage firming. The early parts of the round-the-clock auctions, which are meant to address this, they have not been as successful as hoped, for example. So, what is the financing model if it's not the auctions? How is this going to be paid for?
So, Vijayji, we as a group always look at PPAs as just commercial instrumentalities of delivering power. What's real at the end of the day is there is a certain demand and there is a certain supply. And there is a certain price that either the DISCOM or the consumer is willing to pay for a certain kind of power, looking at the overall affordability index in India. So that's the only thing that's real. PPAs and everything is just, they're synthetic instruments, the way we see it. So what is our focus? Our focus is to make sure that we generate an electron at the cheapest possible rate in the country. Because if we are the cheapest, no matter what cost is to generate or not, no matter what cost is to store it, as long as lights are on, our power will flow. So that's how we look at economics at a fundamental level. But to be honest, yes, financing about this remains is a difficult proposition, just because of scale, because of the sheer volume of capital that is required to fund this.
But it's not just volume, right? I mean, the cost of capital in India still remains higher than it is in developed markets, for example, although it's lower than it is in Africa, let's say, where the world has a higher perceived risk in doing business in Africa. You're in more developed capital markets. But accessing capital, you're paying more than an American developer in Texas would pay.
You're absolutely right. But at the same time, the cost of constructing projects is significantly lower. So if you look at put both those things put together, the delivered cost of electron into the grid, which includes the financing cost, which includes the construction cost, which includes everything. India is one of the lowest cost of electron generation places anywhere in the world.
We have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to press you on one final point, and that is something that's going to increase your costs, I would put to you. I'll challenge you. That is meeting the government objectives of supply chain domestication. I know that unlike many other players, you've been able to move upstream in the solar chain into ingots, into wafers. You're talking about polysilicon, although that's a very big step to take where the Chinese are very cheap and effective. Doesn't this increase the cost? Even if it improves, let's say, resilience and domestic Indian manufacturing ambitions, aren't you guaranteeing that power will be more expensive as a result of these investments?
Of course, the cost of power will increase. Of course, the cost will go up because when China manufactures north of 500 gigawatts, India is at 50.
Why not say thank you to the Chinese taxpayer for subsidizing these goods and welcome these products? Why are you reinventing the wheel?
Because we go back to the same theme, Vijayji, of resilience. Because what every interdependence, what the world has taught us over the last couple of weeks is that every single interdependence is a vulnerability. And when it's times of stress, times of war, times of difficulty, times of, not a very pretty global environment, every one of these interlinkages can be used to exert strategic pressure and influence. That is something India has learned. That is something I believe all of us have learned with whatever we've seen over the last couple of weeks. And the lesson that India has learned and the leadership in India has decided for what the right way for the country is going forward is that we need to make sure that we domesticate our supply chains no matter what the cost is. Because equally as there is a proposition of taking the advantage of Chinese taxpayers subsidizing it, there is equally a prerogative for the country where if they overnight increase, for example, we have no capacity here and they know that, and if you overnight increase prices by 40-50%, what can you do as a country? You'll have to immediately halt all renewable energy additions. So in a way, the capacity addition is not so much as a cost, but also as a hedge for any other country anywhere else in the world to think twice before taking a step of this sort.
Resilience doesn't come for free, but it may be an insurance worth paying for.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's what I believe.
We're just out of time. I see the red lights are flashing. Please join me in thanking Sagar Adani for joining us on stage.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's get a photo.
Thank you so much.
Great, and I thank you. Appreciate it. I appreciate his time, and I welcome my colleague Jonathan to the stage, who will take on the next session. Which way are you? There you are, Jonathan. Welcome. This is Jonathan Birdwell, who's the Global Head of Policy and Insight at Economist Enterprise.
Thank you very much, Vijay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Brilliant morning so far, I'd say. Really a vigorous, very interesting conversations which we're going to pick up on, especially this concept of electrostate in my next session. But first, it is my great honor to be able to present to you a little bit around our new initiative, Resilient Futures. My colleague Asif mentioned that we are launching this today, and I'm so pleased to be here doing this in India. So let me set the scene. The global economy was built for a different era. For decades, our energy, food, water, infrastructure, and natural systems were shaped around extraction, efficiency, and growth. But today, that model is under strain. Climate shocks, resource pressures, rapid urbanization, and geopolitical fragmentation are converging, exposing vulnerabilities in the systems that our societies and economies depend on. According to research from a conglomerate of climate scientists, 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries, those environmental processes which our lives depend on here on Earth, have been transgressed. The consequences of that are no longer distant or theoretical. Businesses and governments are facing rising costs from disrupted supply chains, damaged infrastructure, food and water insecurity, and growing climate and resource risk. Decisive change is no longer simply an environmental choice. It's an economic necessity. If the 20th century was defined by extraction and fragmentation, the 21st century must be defined by security, resilience, and regeneration. That is the purpose of Resilient Futures. Resilient Futures is Economist Enterprises' latest global initiative designed to rethink how we secure prosperity within planetary limits. Our ambition is to move the conversation from risk to response and from awareness to action. It's about giving decision makers foresight, not hindsight, as boards and C-suite and policymakers attempt to navigate systemic uncertainty. At the heart, Resilient Futures asks a simple but urgent question. How can economies become more secure, adaptive, and regenerative, and still grow? Now, we're not launching just another sustainability platform. We're reframing resilience as the precondition for growth. And for those partners who are working with us in this endeavor, it's not just about access to insight. It's about visibility and participation and influence with the policymakers, business leaders, and investors shaping the next era of growth. So the initiative will focus on 3 interconnected systems: energy, resilience, and regeneration. So first, energy. We'll explore the levers needed to accelerate a clean energy economy that is secure, competitive, and sustainable. This is about more than decarbonization. It's about energy security, industrial competitiveness, and the infrastructure required to power future growth. Second, resilience and adaptation. We will assess how infrastructure, cities, and communities can be strengthened against escalating climate risks, protecting critical systems, and building adaptive capacity. That means looking at how we redesign urban environments, protect critical systems, and build the adaptive capacity needed to safeguard economies and societies. Third, regeneration. We will explore how economies can restore natural capital while unlocking the value of circular and efficient models, showing how nature-positive approaches can protect ecosystems and sustain prosperity. Now, across all 3 areas, we'll focus on the practical drivers of change. What financial levers need to be pulled? Which technologies and innovations can accelerate progress? And what policy changes are required to build resilience across these interconnected systems? Together, these work streams, these different lenses will help leaders understand not only the risks ahead, but the pathways to a more secure, regenerative, and economically viable future. So how are we going to bring this to life? Well, we'll use the strengths that make Economist Enterprise distinctive: independent insight, trusted convening power, access to expert voices, and the ability to translate complex issues into clear, actionable narratives. First, we'll lead the global debate. At the core of the initiative will be editorially independent research and analysis designed to reveal what is changing, where risks are emerging, and where progress is possible. Second, we will create a continuous platform for engagement. Through original content, expert perspectives, and events like this here today, Resilient Futures will spotlight innovation, share practical examples, and bring credible voices into the conversation across energy, climate, infrastructure, finance, policy, and nature. And third and finally, we will turn insight into action. The initiative will bring together policymakers, business leaders, investors, and innovators around shared challenges. It will help build consensus, identify those practical pathways, and establish a blueprint for a more secure, resilient, and regenerative growth. In short, Resilient Futures will use the strengths of the Economist Group, our insight, convening power, and influence to help leaders move from understanding systemic risk to designing systems that can withstand it. That is the opportunity in front of us, not simply to respond to disruption, but to help shape a more secure, resilient, and regenerative future. So I would like to encourage you all to please visit the website. I will be around all day, and if you would like to get involved and partner with us on this mission, I would love to hear from you. So thank you very much. So we will now seamlessly move into the next session. And if I could invite up to the stage Pratik Agarwal. Thank you.
Pleasure.
So we've already heard the term electrostate mentioned earlier today. And I'm really delighted to be here with you, Pratik, to lead this conversation. And I'm grateful as well to Sterlite Electric for sponsoring this session. And Pratik, you wear many hats. You're the managing director of Sterlite Electric, but you're also chairman of Resonia, which is a transmission infrastructure developer, chairman of Serentica, a renewable power company. And so I think if there's anyone here that can help us sort of unpack this concept of electrostate and what's required to build it, I think it's you. But before I come to you, I just want to set the scene a little bit, because India's energy debate, as elsewhere, has really been defined around decarbonization. And I think it's very obvious and apparent to all of us that there's an even more immediate and compelling reason for the energy transition, right, and building this electrostate and electrifying. If India's energy security remains dependent on imported oil and gas from some of the most volatile regions in the world, priced in dollars, subject to exactly the type of geopolitical disruption we're currently seeing, then the economic and nation-building ambitions of India seem to be under threat, right? Now, India, as has already been said, has made incredible, remarkable progress on energy access and renewable generation. But the term electrostate seems to imply a bigger ambition, right? A system-wide transformation. So, Pratik, if you can, in plain terms, what do we mean by electrostate? And how far is India from becoming one?
Firstly, thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you to The Economist for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a great honor. And like the previous speaker, Sagar, a good friend, he said that there couldn't be a more appropriate time for this. We are in the midst of a major energy crisis, and this conversation is more relevant today than ever before. So the concept of an electrostate is a new one. And let's talk by defining it, right? There isn't a formal definition, but in my view, if a majority of the nation's energy comes from electricity rather than any other source, you would call that nation an electrostate. Why do we need an electrostate? I think everybody knows the answer. Self-sufficiency, resilience. Can nations largely be dependent on their own sources of energy? Today, sun, wind, batteries provide you that opportunity, at least in large countries like India, which have large land masses. We can genuinely be self-sufficient in energy as long as the main source of energy is electricity. So can we have majority of our energy come from electricity? So I think that's, in a short, what I believe is the basic concept of an electrostate.
So over half, you said, the majority of the power in a country generated by electricity.
Majority of the energy.
Majority of the energy.
Correct.
And so, in many ways, renewables are now cost competitive. Technologies to facilitate this are maturing, and the ambition's clearly there. So, what are the biggest challenges facing India to become an electrostate?
So let me just take a step back and talk about probably the one nation that is the most ahead in this journey. Okay, 20 years ago in China, 18% of its energy came from electricity. 18%. Just in 20 years, China has taken that to close to 30% today. And it's a staggering fact. China's electricity consumption grew by 7 times in the last 20 years, which is a 9% annual compounded growth rate. 9%, right? So those are the sorts of, that's very clearly, I would say, among the large economies in the world, a clear role model for what a country needs to sort of aim towards, right? I'll talk more later about some of the supply side, demand side challenges. But if you ask me a single big bottleneck today in India, and there are, by the way, many good things. So for example, in India, what's going really well, like Sagar, my previous speaker, mentioned, our generation ecosystem is going really well. The country set a target to do 50 gigawatts a year. Most of the world didn't believe it. Most of us didn't believe it. We achieved it. It's a huge achievement. It makes us the largest adder of renewable energy in the democratic world, around the whole world. Okay. Transmission. The whole world is worrying about transmission. There are many challenges in India as well, but India is delivering close to $10 billion of transmission capacity every year at an incredible speed. The average project is taking about 3.5 years, which is substantially better than most places in the world. So if I had to name one big bottleneck, it is the distribution system. For a nation to be an electrostate, there has to be a huge amount of free-flowing electrons at a very low cost and a very large amount of supply capacity. But a chain is as weak as the weakest link, or as strong as the strongest link. And the distribution end of this chain, generation is good, transmission is good, but distribution is still broken. And there needs to be a massive political will to fix the distribution sector. 1 in 6 units of power is still not built in the country, right? Not possible to recover because of various inefficiencies in the system. And if you ask me one solution for this, perhaps what has worked around the world, if I name a few countries like Brazil, is aggressive privatization. Does India have the political will to go for aggressive privatization in distribution? It has achieved success in about 8 circles out of 50 in India, massive success, where losses have come down to single digits and they're mostly now profitable discoms. And if it can do this in the next 4 or 5 years, then it'll probably fix the single biggest bottleneck for being an electrostate.
Interesting. Okay, so the political will, it's not just finance, it's actually aggressive privatization.
That's right.
What would be the first thing? Well, first of all, do you see that trend happening? Do you see the sort of will there in the government to do that? And what would you say is sort of needed to help facilitate that?
So specifically on the will to debottleneck, I would say there are early signs. We had privatization of the Orissa discoms a few years ago. We've had incredible move towards smart metering of the distribution system. We also had a lot of overdues from distribution companies to generation companies, which was put to an end about 3 years ago. So there are baby steps, but if you ask me big political will to really fix distribution sector, I hope to see this in the coming years.
Yeah. So you speak about political will, and you mentioned some of the supply side challenges, but there's also the demand side, right? And that requires some element of political will too, right? So you have mobility and industry and data centers, and how do you ensure that there's that demand transformation, that those on that side, they are asking for electrification?
Yes. Let me talk about the demand side, because I do think that is the single biggest shift, but I'll also come to the supply side, a few more points on that later. So demand side is everything, right? We mentioned that for India to be an electrostate, I did some numbers and so did Sagar mention this earlier. For India to be an electrostate by 2047, which is the big year that everybody talks about, India needs to add about 1,800 gigawatts of base load, which is roughly 7 times the current base load. We hit 250 gigawatts recently, so 7 times of that is 1,800 gigawatts. If India does that, then 50% of India's energy consumption will be electric. Coincidentally, that's exactly what China added in the last 20 years. And India is roughly where China is economically, right? And like the previous moderator mentioned, China didn't have the tools. It didn't have low-cost batteries 20 years ago. It didn't have huge amounts of PV capacity 20 years ago. We have all of that. So genuine chance of doing this. On the demand side, I think there are 3 big areas that India needs to aggressively electrify. First is transport, which is cars, trucks, 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, buses and trains. The second is large amounts of industrial consumption. Steel is the biggest, hardest to electrify, but everything else is not bad, it's doable. We at Serentica, for example, have done a huge mission where the largest zinc company in the world is actually based here in India, and we've taken that company from being 100% fossil to being 80% electric just in 4 years. So it is possible, right? And the third big one is cooking. Cooking consumes a huge amount of gas in India, as we all do in our homes. And can we electrify the habit of cooking, right? Events like this, disruptions like what's happening in the world right now, are also a momentum creator for behavior change. We saw that during COVID, when the country migrated towards digital payments, right? A similar time opportunity we have today. But to do all of this, I think, again, we have to follow the lead from other large countries. You do need heavy fiscal and tax incentives. You need to promote it using both the carrot and the stick method. Carrot is capital rebates for manufacturing, capital rebates for purchasing, tax incentives. Stick is you need to really make it expensive to use fossil, where electric is a real option, such as EVs, such as buses, such as trucks.
And do you see any will or appetite in the government for some of those policies?
We do see, but the question is of magnitude, right? You talked about the fact that the electrostate is something much, much more than this, right? We've talked about adding 50 gigawatts a year, but if you want to be an electrostate, you need to add 5 times of that. 250 gigawatts of renewables, which is about 60 to 80 gigawatts of thermal equivalent, right? So 3 or 4 times of what we're currently adding. So the size and the magnitude of the ambition needs to be bigger. I'm very proud of what India has achieved. But yes, electrostate is going to require an even 2-3 notches higher level of political will than this.
Yeah. So you said you wanted to come back to some supply side points.
Yes.
And I mean, maybe just in general, what do you see as the biggest challenge? Is it the supply side or the demand side, or are they sort of equally? Obviously, it's all a bit difficult, but where do you see the biggest, what needs to move first?
I think it's definitely both. I mean, you just can't put a finger on one. If you ask me between the two, I'm quite motivated by what India achieved last year on the supply side. Having said that, it is still not good enough. We can't rest on our laurels. For example, if you talk to any renewable CEO, perhaps in India or perhaps anywhere in the world, and you ask them their top 2 risks for growth, they'll probably talk about grid capacity and the ability of the grid to absorb intermittent power, right? The 2 biggest issues. Now, on the positive side, India is roughly spending $10 to $15 billion on the grid every year, which is about $100 billion in the next 10 years. However, China is going to spend $700 billion, okay? That's the scale of magnitude that you need to do to sort of get to an electrostate level. So if you ask me a big one on the supply side, so being a grid company, we've built about close to 15% of most of the grid assets in India in the last 10 years. And the single biggest challenge that we see is actually in construction automation. The time it takes to build grids shouldn't be this long. We're currently taking about 3.5 years, and we could build them in about 2 years if we had a lot more construction automation, the things you're seeing, for example, in robotic factories in China or in drone usage and things like that. So big opportunity there. The second one is not in building the grid, but how the grid that is already built is best utilized to absorb what we call as inverter-based electricity, right? The grid is used to AC-based electricity, which is rotating mass. It's not really designed for inverter-based. To do that, you have to inject it with a lot of hardware and software. And again, it's done pretty well, but it probably needs to be 10 times more than what's happened so far. Yeah.
So we're coming close to the end here. We only have 2 minutes left, and you've mentioned a number of policy suggestions and things that need to happen. But I really want to kind of drill in on this. You know, if India is really serious about making this transition, you know, and making it transformational, not just incremental. What are the 1 to 2 decisive moves that need to happen in the next 2 years?
Let me talk about 2 of them, and I'll talk one on the supply side, one on the demand side. See, on the supply side, what we have noticed is that renewable power, as of 6 months ago, is the cheapest form of round-the-clock electricity in India. It's an incredible thing that has happened, right? So for the next 20, 30 years, all of the electricity growth in India, the best people to profit from that are the people who make renewable generation. This hasn't happened in the last 100 years. It's an incredible achievement we have, which means that the country needs to just create the infrastructure and the gigawatts will follow. The land is there. The infrastructure is what needs to step up. So the number one advice I would have for the country is step up your grid investment plans from 100 billion to 300 billion. Now, China is doing 800 billion, but we don't need that because we're a smaller country by land mass. At 300 billion of grid investment, you would have huge amounts of grid where if entrepreneurs want to add 60 to 80 gigawatts of peak load type capacity every year, which is about 250 gigawatts of renewable capacity, they could do that, right? So that's a big one. On the demand side, I think really going after incentivizing the 3 use cases I mentioned, and the biggest one being transport. If we can today, in the two-wheeler segment, India's 20% of new two-wheelers are EVs. However, in cars, it's just about 2%. So what can we do to make that 20, 30, 40, 50%, right? Can we subsidize batteries? Can we subsidize the cars? Can we give depreciation benefits at an individual level? I think aggressive policy measures to really drive use case adoption for electric option rather than the fossil option. These are the 2 biggest things that India needs to do. But it's an incredible opportunity and an incredible time to be doing this. And I'm feeling very confident and proud that this could really happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're out of time, but I'm really struck by just how much progress India has made, how well positioned it is to be, as was said before, one of the world's biggest and sort of most ambitious electrostates. And I think you've been extremely clear around what needs to happen in the next 24 months, right? So step up that investment in grid upgrade plans and really focus on that demand shift for transport. So, Prateek, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Round of applause, please.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And if I can invite, well, he's already on the stage. Over to you, Vijay.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Fantastic. Well, I'm very pleased to get to our next session about the mouse that roared, looking at Cambodia's just energy transition. Please, let me invite to the stage our Honorable Minister from Cambodia, Keo Ratanak, who's Minister of Mines and Energy. Please give him a round of applause as he comes and joins us on stage. Welcome, Minister. Please have a seat. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And for making the trip. We know actually a significant number of the audience is also here from outside of India, so we're very pleased to have an international audience today. And it gives a good perspective that the issues we're dealing with of resilience, of energy transition, of some of the challenges of electrification are not unique to one country, but rather different countries can provide lessons. And one of the interesting things that you've been able to do is an extraordinary expansion of electrification. In the time that you ran the electricity sector yourself, you were able to see, of course, with support of leadership and government, an expansion of electrification that is a breathtaking pace. And now you're looking to dramatically increase the renewable penetrations as well. So can you give us a little perspective for those of us who may not be familiar in detail with your country's success story? What were a couple of the key pillars that enabled you to both expand energy access, which is the essential enabler of development, as well as to try to move towards greater electrification and clean energy? How did you do it?
Thank you, Vijay, for the opportunity and the privilege to be here today. Our story is one of survival, one of national reconciliation and reconstruction. At one point, Cambodia was known to the world as a killing field as a result of the Khmer Rouge genocide. And we emerged from that in 1979 with basically nothing. Human capital almost wiped out, physical infrastructure, including that of electricity, almost gone. So darkness was very much the term that we used at the time. So we began our energy system from a journey to build basic necessity, basic infrastructure by restoring whatever we could, starting with kerosene